The smell of roasted turkey filled the dining room of our family home in suburban Chicago, but I could barely taste the food on my plate. 28 years old, sitting at the same mahogany table where I'd eaten thousands of meals, and I felt like a stranger in my family. My brother Marcus was going on about his latest promotion at the investment, his voice carrying that familiar tone of smugness that had developed over the years. The partners are already talking about making me senior associate next year, he said, cutting into his turkey with theatrical precision. At 26, I'd be the youngest in the firm's history. Mum beamed at him like he'd just announced he'd cured cancer. Oh, Marcus, we're so proud of you. Aren't we, honey? She looked at Dad, who nodded approvingly while swirling his wine. Then there was my sister Emma, fresh from her medical residence, launching into her story about saving someone's life last week. The way she told it, you'd think she was the only doctor in the entire hospital. The attending physician said he'd never seen such quick thinking from a resident, she said, her diamond engagement ring catching the light as she gestured. I pushed the mashed potatoes around, trying to make myself invisible. But invisibility was a luxury I wasn't going to be afforded today. And what about you, Jake? Dad's voice cut through the conversation like a blade. The table fell silent. Still, figuring things out? The way he said it made my stomach clench. I looked up to see him wearing that expression I knew all too well. The one that said I was a disappointment before I even opened my mouth. I'm working on my photography business, I said quietly. I just landed a contract with a local magazine for their photography, Dad interrupted with a bitter laugh. Right, how much did that business make you last month? My cheeks burned. Dad, I'm building something. These things take time. Time, he repeated, leaning back in his chair. You've had plenty of that. Let's see. You dropped out of business school, tried the restaurant thing, then that online marketing venture that went nowhere. Now it's photography. He counted on his fingers, like he was tallying up my failures for a jury. Marcus and Emma exchanged glances across the table. I caught the look, that mix of pity and embarrassment that had become all too familiar at family gatherings. Some people are just late bloomers, Mum said softly, but even her attempt at kindness felt like a bandage on a severed limb. Late bloomers? Dad's voice rose slightly. The boy is 28 years old, Linda. When I was his age, I already had my own accounting firm and was providing for this family. I set down my fork, the metallic clink echoing in the suddenly tense room. I'm sitting right here, Dad. You can talk to me, not about me. That's when it happened. Dad looked directly at me, and I saw something in his eyes I'd never seen before. Not just disappointment, but genuine disdain. His lips curved into a cold smirk that would haunt me for months to come. Look around this table, Jake, he said, his voice steady and cutting. Everyone here succeeded but you. Marcus has his career. Emma's a doctor. Your mother built her own real estate business from nothing. And you're still playing with cameras, living in that cramped apartment, asking us for money when your rent's due. The words hit me like physical blows. I felt my face go hot, then cold. Around the table, I could see the discomfort in everyone's faces, but no one spoke up. No one defended me. That's not fair, I managed to say, though my voice came out weaker than I intended. Fair? Dad laughed again, but there was no humor in it. What's not fair is having a son who's 30 years old and still hasn't figured out how to be a man. I'm 28, I corrected automatically, which only made him shake his head. 28, 30, what's the difference? You're still the same lost kid you were in college, still making excuses, still blaming everyone else for your problems. I looked around the table desperately, hoping for some support, some sign that someone would speak up for me. But Marcus was studying his wine glass intently, Emma was checking her phone, and Mum was fidgeting with her napkin. I work hard, I said, hearing the desperation creeping into my voice. I've been shooting weddings, events, building a portfolio, playing dress up at parties, Dad interrupted. That's not work, that's a hobby. When are you going to get a real job? When are you going to stop being an embarrassment to this family? The word embarrassment hung in the air like smoke. I felt something crack inside my chest, not just my heart, but something deeper, some fundamental belief I'd held about family, about love, about belonging. I stood up slowly, my legs feeling unsteady. I need some air, I said. Oh, here we go, Dad said, throwing his hands up. The dramatic exit, very mature, very adult, but I was already walking away from the table, away from the smell of turkey and the sound of my father's voice. I stepped out onto the back porch, the November air hitting my face like a slap. Chicago stretched out before me, the city lights twinkling in the distance. I pulled out my phone and stared at the screen, realizing I had no one to call, no girlfriend to vent to. That relationship had ended 3 months ago when she said she needed someone more ambitious. No best friend to talk to. Most of my friends had moved away or gotten too busy with their own successful lives. I was alone in every way that mattered. Through the window, I could see my family continuing their dinner, the conversation flowing again as if nothing had happened, as if I'd never been there at all. That's when I knew This wasn't just another family argument. This was the moment everything changed. I walked back inside, ignoring the looks from around the table. "I'm going to pack my things," I said quietly. "What thing?" Dad asked, his smirk returning. "You mean that camera equipment you're storing in the basement? The boxes of art projects that haven't seen daylight in years?" "All of it," I said, my voice steadier now. "I'm taking everything and I'm leaving." "Oh, come on," Emma said, speaking up for the first time. "Don't be so dramatic. Dad didn't mean—" "Yes, he did," I interrupted, looking directly at her. "He meant every word. And you know what? He's right. I am an embarrassment. To you, to him, to this whole family. So I'm removing myself from the equation." Mum's face went pale. "Jake, honey, you don't have to." "Actually, I do," I said. "I should have done this a long time ago." Dad leaned back in his chair, his expression unchanged. "And where exactly are you going to go? Back to that apartment you can barely afford? With what money?" "I'll figure it out," I said. "I always do." "Right," he said with that same cold smile. "Just like you've figured out everything else." I turned and walked toward the basement stairs, my heart pounding. Behind me, I could hear the murmur of voices, but I couldn't make out the words. I didn't want to. In the basement, surrounded by boxes of my old things, I stood in the darkness for a moment. This was it. This was the moment I either broke completely or found a way to rebuild myself from the ground up. I reached for the light switch, illuminating the space where I'd stored the remnants of my various failed ventures. But as I looked around, I realized something. These weren't failures. They were attempts. They were evidence that I'd been trying, learning, growing. Maybe Dad was right about one thing. I had been playing it safe, staying close to home, letting them catch me when I fell. But what if I stopped falling? What if I finally learned to fly? I pulled out my phone and started making calls. First, to my landlord, asking if I could extend my lease month to month. Then to my friend Danny in Portland, who'd been asking me to visit for years. Finally, to a storage facility across town. By the time I went back upstairs, the dinner dishes had been cleared and the family was settling into the living room for dessert. They looked up as I entered, their expressions ranging from concerned to annoyed. "I'm taking my things tomorrow," I announced. "I'd appreciate it if someone could be here to let me—" "Where are you going?" Mum asked, her voice small. "West," I said simply. "I'm going to figure out who I am when I'm not surrounded by people who think I'm a failure." Dad stood up, his face red. "You think running away is going to solve your problems? You think geography is going to magically make you successful?" "I don't know," I said honestly. "But I know staying here isn't going to change anything. Not for me, and not for how you see me." "Fine," Dad said, his voice. "Go. But don't come crawling back when reality hits. Don't call us when you're broke and homeless in some strange city." I looked at him, really looked at, and saw something I'd never noticed before. He wasn't just disappointed in me, he was afraid. Afraid that if I actually succeeded, it would mean he'd been wrong about me all along. "I won't," I said quietly. "I promise you, I won't." As I walked out of that house, I felt the weight of 28 years of expectation, comparisons, and disappointment lifting off my shoulders. I was terrified, but I was also, for the first time in years, truly free. The last thing I heard as I closed the door behind me was the sound of my father's voice, still talking, still explaining to the family why I was making a mistake. But I wasn't listening anymore. The U-Haul truck felt massive compared to my beat-up Honda Civic as I pulled up to my parents' house the next morning. The November sky was grey and threatening snow, matching the heavy feeling in my chest. I'd barely slept, alternating between second-guessing my decision and feeling a strange sense of liberation. Mom opened the door before I even knocked. Her eyes were red-rimmed, and she was wearing her old bathrobe, the one she always wore when she was upset. "Jake, honey, are you sure about this?" she asked, stepping aside to let me in. "Maybe you and your father could talk." "Where is he?" I interrupted, looking around the familiar entryway. "He left early for the office," she said quietly. "Said he had some year-end reports to finish." I nodded, not surprised. Dad had never been good at confrontation the morning after. He preferred to let things settle, pretend they never happened, then gradually return to the status quo. "Mom, I need to ask you something," I said, setting down my box of packing supplies. "And I need you to be honest with me." She wrapped her bathrobe tighter around herself. "What is it? Do you really think I'm a failure?" The question hung between us like a bridge I wasn't sure I wanted to cross. Mum's face crumpled slightly, and she reached out to touch my arm. "Oh, Jake, no, you're not a failure. You're just different. You always have been. Even as a little boy, you saw the world differently than Marcus and Emma." "Different how?" I pressed. She was quiet for a long moment, staring out the window at the frost-covered lawn. "Do you remember when you were 10 and you spent that whole summer taking pictures of insects in the backyard? You had that little disposable camera and you used up roll after roll of film." I smiled despite myself. "I remember. You and Dad thought I was wasting money. Your father did. she corrected. I thought they were beautiful, especially that one of the butterfly on the rosebush. I still have it, it's in my jewelry box upstairs. This surprised me. I'd never known she'd kept any of my childhood photo. But then school started, and your father said you needed to focus on practical sports, grades, preparing for college. He meant well, Jake. He just wanted you to have security. Security, I repeat. That's all he's ever cared about. It's all he knew how to care about, Mum said softly. His father was a factory worker who got laid off when your dad was 16. He had to work 2 jobs to put himself through college. Security isn't just important to him, it's everything. I started unpacking my boxes, heading toward the basement. That doesn't excuse what he said last night. No, she agreed, following me down the stairs. It doesn't. But Jake, honey, maybe this is exactly what you need. Maybe getting away from all these expectations. Maybe that's how you find your own path. I stopped halfway down the stairs and turned to look at her. You want me to leave? I want you to be happy, she said simply. And you haven't been happy here in a long time. Maybe you never were. The basement looked different in the morning light, filtering through the small windows. Less like a storage unit for my failures, and more like a museum of my attempts to become someone. I started with the photography equipment, my cameras, lenses, lighting gear. Some of it was old, some of it borrowed, but all of it represented hours of learning, practicing, dreaming. Where will you go? Mama, helping me wrap a lens in bubble wrap. Portland first, I said. Danny's got a couch I can crash on while I figure things. There's a good creative scene, lots of opportunities for freelance work. And then, I don't know. Maybe I'll stay. Maybe I'll keep moving. That's the point. I don't have to know. I don't have to have a 5-year plan or a backup plan or any plan at all. We worked in comfortable silence for a while, boxing up the remnants of my Chicago life. There were more things than I'd remembered, not just camera equipment, but canvases from my brief painting phase, notebooks full of business ideas, a guitar I'd bought during my maybe I'll be a musician period. You know what I see when I look at all this? Mom said, taping up a box of sketchbooks. What? Someone who's been searching for something his whole life. Someone who's never been afraid to try new things, even when they didn't work out. I looked around at the boxes, seeing them through her eyes. Dad sees quitting, failed projects, wasted time and money. Your father sees risk, she said, and risk terrifies. But you know what I see? I see someone who's never given up, someone who keeps trying, even when it hurts. Around noon, Marcus showed up, looking uncomfortable in his weekend clothes, chinos and a polo shirt, like he was dressed for a country club he didn't belong to. Need help loading? He asked, not quite meeting my eyes. Sure, I said, surprised he'd come. We carried boxes in silence for a while, the tension between us thick as the cold air. Finally, as we loaded the last of my photography equipment, he spoke. Dad was out of line last night, he said quietly. I stopped, holding a box of camera gear. Was he? Yeah, I mean, some of what he said, it wasn't fair. Some of it, Marcus sighed, running a hand through his hair. Look, Jake, I'm not going to pretend your life is perfect. You have struggled with commitment, with following through on things, but that doesn't mean you're a failure. Wow, I said, setting the box down in the truck. That's quite the endorsement. I'm trying to be honest with you, he said, his voice getting defensive. You asked me to be honest. I didn't ask you anything, I pointed out. You just showed up. We stared at each other across the truck bed. 2 brothers who'd somehow become strangers. Marcus had always been the golden child, the one who did everything right the first time. I'd always been the one who had to find his own way, usually through trial and error. Why did you come? I asked. He was quiet for a long moment. Because I realized something last night, after you left. I realized I don't actually know you. We've lived in the same house for 18 years, been in the same family for 28 years, and I don't know what you want out of life. I don't know what makes you happy. I don't even know if you're happy. This admission hung between us like a confession. I'm not, I said simply. Happy, I mean. I haven't been for a long time. Because of us? Because of me, I said. Because I've been trying to be someone I'm not. Because I've been waiting for permission to be myself. Marcus nodded slowly. And now? Now I'm going to figure out who I am when nobody's watching, when nobody's comparing me to anyone else. He helped me secure the last few boxes, and as we closed the truck, he pulled something out of his pocket, a business card. This is my friend David's information. He runs a marketing firm in Portland. He's always looking for good photographers for projects. I told him you might be in touch. I stared at the card, surprised. You did that? I looked at your portfolio online last night, he said, after you left. Jake, you're really good. Like, really good. I don't know why I never looked before, because Dad said it wasn't real work, I said quietly. Dad says a lot of things, Marcus replied. Doesn't mean they're all true. We stood there in the driveway, the truck loaded with my entire life, and for the first time in years, I felt like I was talking to my brother instead of my father's favorite son. I should go, I said. I want to get to Indianapolis before dark. Jake, he said as I climbed into the truck. For what it's worth, I think you're brave. I think you're doing something I could never do. What's that? Starting over. believing in yourself when nobody else does. I started the engine, feeling the weight of the loaded truck behind me. Maybe that's all I ever needed, to believe in myself. As I pulled out of the driveway, I looked back at the house where I'd grown up. Mum was standing in the doorway, Marcus was walking toward his car, and Dad's window was dark. He still wasn't home. But for the first time, I didn't need him to be. I pointed the truck west and began the longest journey of my life. The first night in Indianapolis, I sat in a truck stop diner at 2 a.m., nursing my third cup of coffee and staring at the road atlas spread across the sticky table. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, and the waitress, a tired-looking woman named Betty, kept refilling my cup without being asked. "You look like a man with a plan," she said during one of her stops at my table. "More like a man without one," I replied, tracing the route from Chicago to Portland with my finger. "Sometimes that's better," she said, wiping down the table next to mine. "Plans just give you something to be disappointed about when they don't work out." I thought about that as I drove through the night, the U-Haul truck struggling against the wind on I-70. Betty was right. I'd had plenty of plans over the years, and they'd all led to the same place. My father's dining room table, being told I was a disappointment. But this wasn't a plan. This was just movement. This was just faith that somewhere out there, I could become the person I was meant to be. By the time I reached Kansas, I was running on fumes and stubbornness. I pulled into a rest stop outside of Topeka and called Danny. "Jake!" His voice was bright and energetic, even at 7 a.m. Pacific time. "Dude, I can't believe you're actually doing this. How far out are you?" "Still in Kansas," I said, watching the sunrise paint the prairie in shades of gold and pink. "I should be there tomorrow afternoon." "This is so cool, man. I've got the couch all set up and I already talked to some people about photography work. There's a wedding next weekend that needs a second shooter, and there's this coffee shop that wants product shots for their new line of beans." I felt a flicker of something I hadn't experienced in months. Hope. "Danny, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me." "Shoot. Why are you helping? We haven't talked in 2 years, and now I'm basically showing up as a refugee from my own life." There was a long pause on the other end. "You remember sophomore year of college, when I was having that breakdown about changing my major?" "Yeah. And you sat with me in that crappy campus coffee shop for 6 hours, helping me figure out what I actually wanted to do with my life. You didn't judge me. You didn't tell me what you thought I should do. You just listened and asked the right question." I remembered that night. Danny had been majoring in pre-med because his parents expected, but he was miserable. We talked until the coffee shop closed, and then we'd walked around campus until sunrise, talking about dreams and fears, and the difference between what we wanted and what we thought we should want. "You helped me find the courage to switch to graphic design," he continued. "And now I have my own studio. I love what I do, and I'm happier than I've ever been. So when you called and said you needed to start over, I thought maybe it was time for me to return the favor." "Thank you," I said, meaning it more than I'd meant anything in years. "Don't thank me yet, Danny. Wait until you see the couch. It's older than both of us combined." I drove through the day, making good time through Colorado and into Utah. The landscape changed with each mile, flat prairie giving way to rolling hills, then to mountains that took my breath away. I'd driven this route before, but always as a passenger, always on someone else's schedule. Now, driving alone with my entire life packed behind me, I saw it differently. I stopped in a small town in Utah for gas and food, and while I was stretching my legs, a local photographer named Sarah struck up a conversation. She'd noticed my camera gear through the truck window and was curious about my setup. "You're a photographer?" she asked, looking at my equipment with professional interest. "I'm trying to be," I said, then corrected myself. "I mean, yes, I am," she smiled. "That's the right answer. Mind if I take a look at your work?" I pulled out my tablet and showed her some of my recent shoots, weddings, portraits, some landscape work I'd done in Chicago. She scrolled through them slowly, her expression serious. "You've got a good eye," she said finally. "Really good. Your composition is strong, and you understand light better than most people with twice your experience." "Really?" I asked, hating how desperate I sounded. "Really? Where are you heading?" "Portland. I'm starting over." She nodded thoughtfully. "Portland's a good city for creatives. Lots of opportunity if you're willing to work for. But can I give you some advice? Please, stop apologizing for what you do. You introduced yourself as someone who's trying to be a photographer, but you are a photographer. You have the equipment, you have the skills, you have the eye. Own it." That night, in a motel outside of Salt Lake City, I sat on the bed and really looked at my portfolio for the first time in months. Not through my father's eye, not through the lens of comparison with my sibling, but through my own eyes. Sarah was right. I was good. Not perfect, not finished learning, but good. The wedding photos showed couples in love, captured in moments of pure joy. The portraits revealed something true about each person, a flash of personality, a glimpse of their inner life. The landscape shots showed the world as I saw it, beautiful, complex, worth preserving. I thought about all the times I'd downplayed my work, all the times I'd let Dad's dismissive comments make me doubt myself. I thought about the business card I'd been too embarrassed to hand out, the clients I'd undercharged because I didn't believe my work was worth full price. That ended now. I pulled out my laptop and spent the next 3 hours updating my website, my portfolio, my business material. I raised my rates to what they should have been all along. I wrote a new bio that didn't apologize for my path or explain my career changes. It simply stated what I did and how well I did it. When I finally fell asleep, it was with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in years. The next morning, I woke up early and drove to a nearby national park to watch the sunrise. I set up my camera on a tripod and captured the light as it painted the red rocks in brilliant colors. But more than that, I captured something else, a sense of possibility, of new beginnings, of horizons opening up instead of closing in. As I packed up my equipment, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Jake, this is David Chen. Marcus gave me your contact info. I looked at your portfolio online. Impressive work. I'd like to discuss some potential projects when you get to Portland. Welcome to the city." I stared at the phone, reading the message 3 times. Marcus had actually followed through. He'd actually talked to his friend about my work. For the first time since leaving Chicago, I called home. "Jake?" Mum's voice was breathless, like she'd run to the phone. "Are you okay? Where are you?" "I'm in Utah," I said. "Mum, I'm good. I'm really good." "Oh, honey, I'm so glad to hear your voice. Your father's been..." "Actually, Mum, I don't want to talk about Dad right. I want to talk about you. I want to tell you about the sunrise I just photographed, and the photographer I met yesterday who said I have a good eye, and the text I just got from a potential client in Portland." "A client?" "Marcus gave someone my information. His friend David. He wants to discuss projects." "Marcus did that?" Mum's voice was soft with surprise. "He did. And Mum, I need to tell you something. I've been thinking about what you said in the basement, about how I see the world differently. I think you're right, but I don't think it's a flaw anymore. I think it's my strength." "Oh, Jake," she said, and I could hear the tears in her voice. "I think so too." We talked for another 20 minutes, and for the first time in years, it felt like I was talking to my mother instead of my father's wife. She told me about her own dreams, about how she'd always wanted to travel, but had never found the courage to go alone. She told me about the real estate business she'd built, how proud she was, how Dad still sometimes acted like it was just a hobby. "Maybe when I get settled in Portland, you could come visit," I said. "We could explore the city together. I would love that. I would absolutely love that." As I got back in the truck and continued west, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Excitement about the future. Not anxiety about what might go wrong, but genuine anticipation about what might go right. The mountains of Utah gave way to the desert of Nevada, and as I drove through the changing landscape, I felt myself changing too. With each mile, I was leaving behind the version of myself who apologized for existing, who waited for permission to dream, who measured his worth by other people's standards. I was becoming someone new, someone who owned his choices, who believed in his abilities, who understood that success wasn't just about making other people proud. It was about becoming the person you were meant to be. As the sun set behind me and the lights of Reno appeared in the distance, I knew I was more than halfway to Portland. But more than that, I was more than halfway to finding myself. Danny's apartment was exactly what I'd expected, a converted warehouse space in Portland's Pearl District, with exposed brick walls covered in his graphic design work, and enough vintage furniture to stock a small antique shop. The couch he'd mentioned was indeed ancient, but it was also surprisingly comfortable. "Welcome to your new life," he said, helping me unload the truck. "Population, you. That's terrifying and exciting at the same time," I admitted, carrying my camera equipment up the narrow stairs. "The best changes usually are," he replied. That first week was a blur of activity. I met with David Chen, Marcus's friend, and landed 3 projects right away. A product shoot for a local brewery, headshots for a tech startup, and documentation for a non-profit's fundraising event. The work was good, the pay was fair, and for the first time in months, I felt like a professional. But the real breakthrough came on a rainy Thursday morning, when I was walking through Pioneer Square with my camera, just shooting street scenes for practice. I noticed an elderly man sitting on a bench, feeding pigeons from a paper bag. The way the light caught the rain on his coat, the gentle concentration on his face, the birds gathering around his feet. It was a perfect moment. I approached him carefully. "Excuse me, sir. I'm a photographer, and I was wondering if you'd mind if I took your picture." He looked up at me with bright blue eyes. "What kind of photographer?" "The kind who sees beauty in ordinary moments," I said, surprising myself with the confidence in my voice. He smiled. Well then, I suppose ordinary moments are all we really have, aren't they? I spent the next hour talking with Harold, that was his name, and taking photos. He told me about his wife, who'd passed away 3 years ago, about how he came to this bench every morning because it was where they'd had their first date 60 years ago. He told me about the pigeons, how he'd gotten to know each one, how they'd become his companions in retirement. The photos were magical, but more than that, the conversation was transformative. Harold had worked as a bookkeeper for 40 years, raised 3 children, lived what most people would consider an unremarkable life. But the way he talked about his wife, about the small rituals that gave his days meaning, about the beauty he found in routine, it made me understand something about my own journey. You know what I think? Harold said as I was packing up. I think you're not just taking pictures, you're collecting stories. And stories are the most important thing in the world. That night, I stayed up late editing the photos and thinking about what Harold had said. I realized that's what I'd been doing wrong all these years. I'd been so focused on trying to be successful that I'd forgotten why I'd fallen in love with photography in the first place. It wasn't about the equipment or the technique or the business plan, it was about the story. The next morning, I called David Chen. David, I have an idea for a project, something bigger than what we've been working on. I'm listening. I want to do a portrait series. Real people, real stories, not models, not actors, just people living their lives in Portland. I think it could be powerful marketing clients, showing them as part of the community, connected to real stories. There was a pause on the other end. That's actually brilliant. It's authentic, it's local, it's exactly what brands are looking for right now. How soon can you put together a proposal? I spent the weekend developing the concept. I called it Faces of Portland, a series of portraits and stories that would showcase the diversity and character of the city. Each photo would be accompanied by a short story about the person, their connection to Portland, their dream and experience. The first person I featured was Harold. The photo of him on the bench, surrounded by pigeons, with the rain creating a soft glow around, was stunning. But the story was what made it special. His love for his wife, his daily ritual of remembrance, his philosophy about finding beauty in ordinary moments. When I showed the piece to David, he was quiet for a long moment. Jake, this is extraordinary. This isn't just photography. This is storytelling. This is art. Thank you, I said. And for the first time in my life, I didn't downplay the compliment or make excuses for my work. I want to show this to some people. I think we could get you gallery space, maybe even some media coverage. Are you ready for that? Was I ready? 6 months ago, I'd been sitting at my parents' dinner table, being told I was a failure. Now I was being offered gallery space in Portland. Yes, I said, I'm ready. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. I continued the portrait series, meeting people all over. A young mother who'd started a community garden, a veteran who'd become a chef, a transgender teenager who'd found acceptance in the city's arts community. Each story was different, but they all shared something: resilience, hope, the courage to be authentically themselves. The photos were getting attention. David shared them with his clients, who wanted to know more about the photographer behind the project. I started getting requests for commercial work, but also for more personal projects. Families wanting portraits that told their stories. Couples wanting wedding photography that captured the deeper meaning of their commitment. One evening, as I was editing photos in Danny's apartment, my phone rang. It was Emma. Jake? Her voice was hesitant, uncertain. I hope it's okay that I'm calling. Of course it's okay, I said, though I was surprised. Emma and I hadn't spoken since Thanksgiving. I saw your photos online, she said. Marcus shared them on Facebook. Jake, they're incredible. Thank you. No, I mean it. I've been looking at them for an hour, reading all the stories. The one about the veteran who became a chef made me cry. And that elderly man with the pigeons. There's so much love in that photo. I found myself smiling. His name is Harold. He's become a good friend. Jake, I need to apologize, Emma said, her voice getting stronger. For Thanksgiving, for not standing up for you, for all the times I went along with Dad's perspective about your career. No, let me finish. I've been thinking about this for weeks. Do you know what I do at the hospital? I take care of people when they're sick. It's important work, and I'm good at it. But your photos, they celebrate people when they're just living their lives. They show the beauty in ordinary moments. That's not less important than what I do. It might be more important. I had to set down my laptop because my hands were shaking slightly. I don't know what to say. Say you forgive me. Say you forgive all of us for making you feel like you had to be someone you weren't. There's nothing to forgive, I said, and I meant it. We were all just trying to figure out how to be a family. Are you happy, Jay? Really happy? I looked around Danny's apartment, at my photos spread across his dining table, at the city lights twinkling beyond the window. Yes, I said. I really am. Good, she said, and I could hear the relief in her voice. That's all I wanted to know. After we hung up, I sat in the dark for a while, processing the conversation. It occurred to me that leaving Chicago hadn't just changed me. It had changed how my family saw me, and maybe how they saw themselves. A few days later, I got an email that changed everything. Dear Mr. Matthew, my name is Sarah Chen, David's sister, and I'm the curator for the Northwest Contemporary Gallery. I've been following your Faces of Portland series, and I'm writing to offer you a solo exhibition. We have an opening in our schedule for March, and I believe your work would be perfect for our spring showcase. Please let me know if you're interested in discussing this opportunity. Best regards, Sarah Chen. I read the email 3 times before it sank in. A solo exhibition, my own show. I called David immediately. Did you know about this? I may have mentioned your work to my sister, and I could hear the grin in his voice. But Jake, she doesn't offer exhibitions lightly. If Sarah wants to show your work, it's because it's genuinely exceptional. That weekend, I met with Sarah at the gallery. It was a beautiful space in the Pearl District, with high ceilings and natural light flooding through large windows. As we walked through the empty rooms, she talked about her vision for the exhibition. I want to call it American Portraits. Stories from the city, she said. Your work captures something essential about contemporary American life. The diversity, the resilience, the way people create meaning and community wherever they are. That sounds perfect, I said, trying to keep the excitement out of my voice. We'll need about 40 pieces for the full exhibition. How many do you have in the series so far? 23, I said, but I can easily get to 40 by March. Excellent. And Jake, there's something else. The Portland Arts Council gives an emerging artist grant each year, $25,000 to support a local artist's work. I'd like to nominate you. $25,000. It was more money than I'd made in the previous 6 months combined. I don't know what to say, I said honestly. Say yes, Sarah smiled. Say yes, and then go create something beautiful. That night, I called my mother. Jake, how are you, honey? Mom, I have something to tell you. I'm having a solo exhibition at a gallery here in Portland. The silence on the other end lasted so long, I thought the call had dropped. Mom, I'm here, she said, and her voice was thick with emotion. Oh, Jake, I'm so proud of you. So incredibly proud. There's more. I might be getting a grant from the city to continue the work. A grant? $25,000, Mom, to support my art. She was crying now. I could hear it in her voice. Your father is going to have to eat his words, she said. This isn't about Dad, I said gently. This is about me finally believing in myself. You're right, she said. But Jake, I hope someday he realizes what an amazing son he had. As December turned into January, I threw myself into completing the portrait series. I found stories everywhere. A firefighter who wrote poetry in his spare time. A homeless woman who'd earned her GED at 55. A young couple who'd started an urban farm in an abandoned lot. Each portrait was a reminder that success wasn't just about money or traditional careers. It was about finding purpose, creating meaning, contributing something valuable to the world. The grant application was extensive. I had to submit a portfolio, an artist statement, a project proposal, and references. As I worked on it, I realized how much my perspective had changed. 6 months ago, I would have apologized for my unconventional path, made excuses for my career changes, downplayed my abilities. Now I wrote about my journey as a strength. I talked about how my varied experiences had given me empathy for different kinds of people, how my struggles had taught me resilience, how my willingness to take risks had led me to discover my true calling. When I submitted the application in February, I felt like I was submitting my story. Not the story my father wanted me to have, but the story I'd chosen to write for myself. 2 weeks later, I got the call. Mr. Matthews, this is Jennifer Walsh from the Portland Arts Council. I'm calling to inform you that you've been selected for this year's Emerging Artist Grant. I had to sit down. Are you there, Mr. Matthews? Yes, I managed. Yes, I'm here. Thank you. Thank you so much. Your proposal was exceptional. The committee was particularly impressed with your community engagement and the way your work celebrates the diversity of Portland. Congratulations. When I hung up, I immediately called Danny, who whooped so loudly his neighbors probably thought someone was being murdered. Then I called David, who insisted on taking me out for drinks to celebrate. Finally, I called my mother. Jake, I was just thinking about you. How's the exhibition planning going? Mom, I got it. I got the grant. She screamed, actually screamed with joy. $25,000, I said, to continue my portrait work. Oh my God, Jake, this is incredible. Wait until I tell your father. How is Dad? I asked. It was the first time I'd brought him up since I'd left Chicago. He's processing, she said carefully. Marcus showed him your photos. He didn't say much, but he looked at them for a long time. And? And I think he's realizing that maybe he doesn't know everything about what makes a person successful. That night, as I sat in my apartment, I'd moved into my own place in January. Looking out at the Portland skyline, I thought about the journey that had brought me here. 6 months ago, I'd been a failure in my father's eyes. Now I was an artist with a gallery exhibition and a grant from the city. But more than that, I was happy. I was doing work I loved, work that mattered, work that connected me to my community in meaningful ways. I picked up my camera and looked through the viewfinder at the city lights, thinking about all the stories still waiting to be told, all the faces still waiting to be seen. This was just the beginning. The opening night of American Portraits, Stories from the City was everything I had dreamed of and more. The Northwest Contemporary Gallery was packed with people, the walls lined with my photograph, each one telling the story of someone who had opened their life to my camera. I stood near the entrance, wearing the new suit Danny had insisted I buy, watching people move through the space, stopping to read the stories accompanying each portrait. The conversations I overheard were exactly what I'd hoped for. "Look at this one," a woman said to her companion, standing in front of Harold's portrait. "He comes to this bench every day to remember his wife. Isn't that beautiful? This photographer really sees people." Another visitor commented, "These aren't just pretty pictures, they're windows into lives." Sarah Chen appeared at my elbow, elegant in a black dress, her face glowing with satisfaction. "Jake, this is extraordinary. Do you see how people are engaging with the work? They're not just looking, they're connecting." She was right. People weren't just glancing at the photos and moving on. They were reading every word of the accompanying story, discussing them with their companions, some even taking notes. "Mr. Matthews," a woman approached me, extending her hand. "I'm Rebecca Martinez from the Portland Tribune. I was wondering if I could ask you a few questions about the exhibition." The interview was my first real media experience, and I was nervous at first. But as Rebecca asked about the project, about my process, about what had inspired me to focus on ordinary people's stories, I found my voice. "I think we live in a time when people feel invisible," I said. "Everyone's so focused on celebrity, on social media influencers, on people who seem perfect. But the real beauty, the real inspiration is in the everyday hero, the people who show up, who care for each other, who find joy and meaning in simple things. And these are all Portland resident. They are. But I think you could do this project in any city, any town. Every place has these stories. We just have to be willing to look, to listen, to see people as they really are." As the evening progressed, something unexpected. People started approaching me to share their own stories. A veteran told me about his struggle with PTSD and how art therapy had saved his life. A young mother talked about raising her child alone while finishing nursing school. An elderly man shared memories of immigrating to America 50 years ago. "You should photograph my neighbor," one woman said. "She's 93 and still volunteers at the animal shelter every week." "There's this kid in my son's class," another person suggested. "He builds these incredible sculptures out of recycled material." I realized that the exhibition had done more than showcase my work. It had created a space for people to recognize the value of their own story, their own community. Around 9 o'clock, as the crowd was beginning to thin, I saw a familiar face near the entrance. Marcus, looking slightly overwhelmed but trying to smile. "Marcus?" I couldn't believe he was there. "What are you doing here?" "I flew in this morning," he said. "I wanted to see this for myself." We stood there awkwardly for a moment, two brothers in a room full of strangers, both unsure how to navigate this new dynamic. "Jake, this is..." He looked around the gallery, at the crowd still gathered around my photos. "This is incredible. I mean, I saw the photos online, but seeing them here, seeing how people are responding to them, you've created something really special." "Thank you," I said, still processing his presence. "I can't believe you came all this way." "I had to," he said simply. "I needed to see who you'd become." We walked through the exhibition together, Marcus stopping to read each story carefully. When we reached Harold's portrait, he stood for a long time, just looking. "He comes to that bench every day," Marcus asked. "Every morning at 8, rain or shine. We've become friends. He's taught me a lot about finding meaning in routine, about how love persists, even after." Marcus nodded slowly. "I think I've been so focused on achieving things that I forgot about meaning, about connection." We continued through the gallery, and I watched my brother see my work, really see it, for the first time. When we reached the portrait of Maria, the young mother who'd started the community garden, he stopped again. "Tell me about her," he said. I told him Maria's story, how she'd moved to Portland with nothing, how she'd struggled to feed her family, how she'd convinced the city to let her turn an abandoned lot into a space where neighbors could grow food together. "She's changing her community one tomato plant at a time," I said. "She's not making a lot of money, she's not famous, but she's making a real difference in people's lives." Like you, Marcus said quietly. What? Like you're doing? With these photos, these stories, you're making people feel seen, feel valued. That's not nothing, Jake. That's everything. Later that evening, after the gallery had closed and we'd helped clean up, Marcus and I sat in a late-night diner, drinking coffee and talking in a way we hadn't since we were kids. I owe you an apology, Marcus said suddenly, for Thanksgiving, for all the times I went along with Dad's criticism instead of standing up for you. Marcus, no, let me say this. I was jealous of you. This surprised me. Jealous? Of what? Of your courage, of your willingness to try new things, even when they didn't work out. I've been following the same path since I was 18. Good grades, good college, good job, good salary. But watching you tonight, seeing what you've built, I realized I don't even know what I want. I've been so busy doing what I was supposed to do that I never asked myself what I actually wanted to do. It's not too late, I said. It's never too late to figure out what you want. I don't know where to start. Start with one small thing that makes you curious. One thing you've always wanted to try but talked yourself out of. Marcus smiled. Actually, I've always wanted to learn guitar, but I told myself it was impractical, that I was too old to start. You're 26, not 96. Buy a guitar when you get back to Chicago. Maybe I will. We talked until 3 in the morning, sharing stories and perspectives we'd never shared before. For the first time in our lives, we talked as equal, as friends, rather than as competitors for our parents' approval. Are you going to call Dad? Marcus asked, as we were getting ready to leave. I don't know, I said honestly. Part of me wants to. Part of me wants him to see what I've accomplished. But another part of me realizes I don't need his approval anymore. He knows about the exhibition, Marcus said. Mum told him. He looked at all the photos online. What did he say? Nothing. But he looked at them for a long time, and I caught him reading the reviews from the Portland papers. 3 days after the opening, I got a phone call that changed everything. It was from a gallery owner in New York who'd seen coverage of my exhibition online. Mr. Matthews, my name is Jonathan Reeves. I run the Whitman Gallery in Soho. I've been following the coverage of your Portland exhibition, and I'm very interested in discussing representation in New York. By a gallery I'd dreamed of showing in since art school. I'd like to propose bringing American portraits to New York, he continued, but I'd want to expand it. Portland is just the beginning. I'd like you to create similar bodies of work in other cities. Boston, Atlanta, Denver, a traveling exhibition that captures the diversity of American stories. I sat down heavily in my chair. That sounds incredible. It would be a 2-year project with substantial financial backing. You'd be able to travel, work full-time on your art, build a national reputation. Are you interested? Very interested, I managed to say. After we hung up, I sat in my apartment, staring out at the Portland skyline, trying to process what had just happened. A year ago, I'd been a failed entrepreneur living in his childhood bedroom. Now I was being offered the opportunity of a lifetime. I called my mother first. Jake, perfect timing. I was just looking at the articles about your exhibition online. I'm so proud I could burst. Mum, I have news. A gallery in New York wants to represent me. They want to expand the portrait project into a national touring exhibition. The silence on the other end was so long, I thought the call had dropped. Mom, I'm here, she said, her voice thick with emotion. Oh, Jake, oh my God, this is beyond anything I ever dreamed for you. It's beyond anything I ever dreamed for myself. When would this start? This summer? I'd spend the next few months finishing up projects here in Portland, then start traveling to create new bodies of work. Your father, she said suddenly. What about him? Jake, you need to call him. You need to tell him about this yourself. I was quiet for a long moment. I don't know if I'm ready for that conversation. Honey, I know things have been difficult between you two, but he's your father. And despite everything that's happened, despite all the things he's said, he loves you. He just doesn't know how to show it. He told me I was an embarrassment to the family. He was wrong, she said firmly. And I think somewhere in his heart, he knows that. That night, I walked through the streets of Portland, my camera around my neck, thinking about the conversation with my mother. I found myself at Harold's bench, where the old man was sitting despite the late hour. Jake, he called out as I approached. How did the big night go? I sat down beside him and told him about the exhibition, about Marcus's visit, about the offer from New York. Harold listened intently, nodding occasionally. And now you're wondering whether to call your father, he said when I finished. How did you know? Because that's what you do when something wonderful. You want to share it with the people who matter most, even if they've hurt you. What would you do? Harold was quiet for a long moment, watching the pigeons peck at crumbs on the ground. When my wife died, our daughter and I had been estranged for 5 years. Something silly. I can't even remember what we fought about. Pride, probably. Stubbornness. After the funeral, she came up to me and said, Dad, I'm sorry we wasted so much time. And I realized that life is too short to let pride keep you from the people you love. Your father may not know how to apologize, Jake. He may not even realize he needs to, but that doesn't mean you can't be the bigger person. I thought about Harold's words as I walked home. By the time I reached my apartment, I'd made my decision. I picked up my phone and dialed my father's number. The phone rang 4 times before Dad answered. His voice was cautious, uncertain, not the confident tone I remembered from childhood. Jake, hi Dad. There was a long pause. In the background, I could hear the television, probably the evening news he always watched with his coffee. Your mother said you might call, he said finally. Did she tell you why? Another pause. She mentioned some good news about your work. The hesitation before the word work didn't go unnoted, but it wasn't the dismissive tone I'd expected. If anything, it sounded like he was choosing his words carefully. Dad, I got offered representation by a gallery in New York. They want to turn my Portland project into a national touring exhibition. The silence stretched so long, I wondered if he'd hung up. Dad, I'm here. His voice was different now, softer, maybe even a little shaky. Jake, I looked at your photographs, the ones from your exhibition, and they're remarkable, really remarkable. I spent an hour reading every story, looking at every face. That man on the bench, the one feeding the pigeons, Harold, yes. The way you captured him, the story about his wife, it made me think about your mother and me, about what it means to love someone for 60 years. I felt my throat tighten. This was not the conversation I'd expected. Dad, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. Okay, do you regret what you said at Thanksgiving? About me being an embarrassment? The pause this time was so long I could hear my own heartbeat. Yes, he said finally, and his voice broke slightly on the word. Jake, I regret it more than anything I've ever said in my life. I had to sit down. In all my 28 years, I'd never heard my father admit to being wrong about anything. Why did you say it? Because I was scared, he said simply. Because I looked at you and saw myself at your age, full of dreams, but no clear path, no security, no guarantee of success. And instead of encouraging you, I tried to force you into the same safe box I'd built for myself. Dad, let me finish, please. I need to say this. I could hear him take a deep breath. When I was your age, I wanted to be a teacher. Did you know that? No, I didn't. I wanted to teach high school history. I loved the subject, loved the idea of shaping young minds. But my father, your grandfather, convinced me it was impractical. No money in teaching, he said. No security. So I went into accounting instead. I'd never heard this story before. In my mind, Dad had always been an accountant, had always wanted the safe, predictable life he'd built. I was good at it, he continued. I built a successful practice, provided for my family, achieved everything I was supposed to achieve. But Jake, not a day has gone by in the last 30 years that I haven't wondered what my life would have looked like if I'd had the courage to follow my dreams instead of playing it safe. Why are you telling me this? Because when I saw you struggling, trying different things, refusing to settle for a traditional path, it reminded me of all the risks I was too afraid to take. And instead of being proud of your courage, I was resentful. I wanted you to fail, because if you succeeded, it would prove that I'd been wrong about everything. I felt tears starting to form in my eyes. Dad, you weren't wrong. You built a good life. You provided for us. I built a safe life, he interrupted. But you, Jake, you're building a meaningful life. You're making art that matters, telling stories that need to be told, connecting with people in ways I never learned how to do. And I'm so damn proud of you, I don't know how to express it. The words hit me like a physical force. You're proud of me. I'm proud of you for having the courage I never had. I'm proud of you for getting back up every time you fell down. I'm proud of you for believing in yourself even when I didn't believe it. And I'm ashamed, deeply ashamed, that it took a gallery exhibition and a New York offer for me to realize what an extraordinary son I have. I was crying now, not even trying to hide it. Dad, I just wanted you to see me, to see that I was trying, that I wasn't just drifting aimlessly. I see you now, he said, his own voice thick with emotion. And what I see is a man who found his call, who's making a difference in the world, who has the kind of integrity and vision I always wished I had. We sat in silence for a moment, 30 years of misunderstanding and hurt, beginning to dissolve between us. Jake, yeah, Dad, can you forgive me for all of it? For not supporting you, for making you feel like you weren't enough, for saying things that no father should ever say to his son. There's nothing to forgive, I said, meaning it completely. We both did the best we could with what we knew at the time. No, he said firmly. I was the parent. I should have done better. I should have seen your strength instead of focusing on what I perceived as weakness. Dad, can I tell you something? Anything. Leaving Chicago, starting over in Portland, it was the hardest thing I've ever done. But it was also the best thing, not just because of the success, but because it taught me who I am. when I'm not trying to be who other people think I should be. And who are you? I thought about Harold on his bench, about Maria in her garden, about all the people who'd shared their stories with me. I'm someone who sees beauty in ordinary moments, someone who believes that everyone's story matters, someone who uses art to help people feel less alone in the world. That's a beautiful thing to be, Dad said softly. I learned it from you, actually. From me. You taught me about hard work, about persistence, about providing for the people you love. You just did it through numbers and spreadsheets. I do it through photographs and stories. But the core values, taking care of people, building something lasting, making a contribution, that all came from you. Dad was quiet for a long moment. I never thought of it that way. Maybe that's what this whole journey has been about. Not becoming someone different, but becoming myself more fully. Jake, I want to come to New York. When you have your exhibition there, I want to be there. Your mother and I both do. I'd love that. I'd really love that. And Jake, about that teaching thing I mentioned? Yeah? I've been thinking about retiring early, maybe doing some volunteer work. There's a literacy program at the library that needs tutors. It's not exactly teaching history, but Dad, that's amazing. You should absolutely do that. You think so? I think it's never too late to follow a dream, even if it's a different version of the dream you started with. Or, we talked for another hour. About the New York opportunity, about his potential volunteer work, about Marcus's surprising decision to buy a guitar, about Emma's growing interest in medical photography. For the first time in my adult life, we talked like two men who respected each other, rather than a disappointed father and a failing son. When we finally hung up, I sat in my apartment feeling like something fundamental had shifted in the universe. The man who had defined failure for me my entire life had just told me he was proud of who I'd become. I picked up my camera and walked to the window, looking out at the Portland skyline. In 6 months, I'd be in a new city, starting a new chapter of this project. But tonight, I was exactly where I needed to be. Not running from my past anymore, but carrying the best parts of it with me into the future. My phone buzzed with a text from my mother. Your father has been crying for 20 minutes. Happy tears. Thank you for calling him. I texted back. Thank you for pushing me to do it. As I got ready for bed, I thought about the conversation with Dad, about forgiveness and understanding, about the courage it takes to admit you're wrong, and the grace it takes to accept an apology. Tomorrow, I would start planning for New York, for the next phase of American Portraits, for the opportunity to tell stories on a national stage. But tonight, I was just a son who had finally found his way home to his father's love. 6 months later, I stood in the Whitman Gallery in Soho, watching the final preparations for the opening of American Portraits, Stories from the Heartland. The past half year had been a whirlwind of travel, photography, and storytelling. I'd captured faces and stories in Denver, Atlanta, Boston, and Chicago. Yes, Chicago, where I'd returned not as a prodigal son, but as an artist with a mission. The Chicago portion of the project had been particularly meaningful. I'd photographed people in my old neighborhood, including Mrs. Chen, who'd run the corner market where I'd bought candy as a kid, and Mr. Rodriguez, the high school teacher who'd encouraged my early interest in photography. Coming home with a camera and a purpose had shown me how much the city had shaped me, how many stories I'd overlooked in my eagerness to escape. Jake, the Times photographer is here, Sarah Chen said, appearing at my elbow. She'd flown in from Portland for the opening, and I just saw the mayor's office arrive. The mayor's office? Apparently they're interested in commissioning a similar project for New York, something about documenting the city's diversity through portrait stories. I shook my head in amazement. A year ago, I'd been packing my life into a U-Haul truck, driving away from everything I'd known. Now mayors wanted to hire me to tell their city's story. Mr. Matthews, a young woman with a press badge, approached. I'm Jennifer Walsh from the New York Times. Could we talk about the project? As I spoke with the reporter, explaining the evolution of American Portraits from a Portland project to a national conversation about community and belonging, I kept scanning the crowd for familiar faces. Marcus had flown in from Chicago, and Emma was coming straight from the hospital where she'd just finished a shift. But the faces I was most anxious to see were my parents. They'd driven up from Chicago that morning, their first time in New York City together in 20 years. Mum had called me that afternoon, excited and nervous, asking 3 times for directions from their hotel to the gallery. There's something magical about this project, I told the Times report. Every city I've visited, every person I've photographed has taught me something new about resilience, about community, about the ways people create meaning in their lives. But more than that, it's taught me that everyone has a story worth telling. And what's your story? She asked. I thought about how to answer that. My story is about learning that success isn't about fitting into someone else's definition of accomplishment. It's about finding your authentic voice and using it to serve something larger than yourself. As the interview wrapped up, I saw them, my parents, standing near the entrance, looking slightly overwhelmed but trying to take everything in. Dad was wearing his best suit, the one he reserved for important occasions, and Mum was in the blue dress she'd worn to Emma's medical school graduation. I excused myself and walked toward them, my heart pounding in a way it hadn't since the first time I'd exhibited my work. "You made it," I said, hugging Mom first. Then, after a moment's hesitation, "Dad, we wouldn't have missed this for anything," Mum said, her eyes already bright with tears. "Jake, this is incredible. Look at all these people, all here to see your work." Dad was quieter, but his eyes were moving systematically around the gallery, taking in each photograph, each story displayed on the walls. "Which one should we see first?" I led them to the Portland section, starting with Harold's portrait. As we moved through the exhibition, I told them the stories behind each photograph, not just the stories I'd written to accompany the images, but the deeper stories of how I'd met each person, what I'd learned from them, how they'd changed my perspective. When we reached the Chicago section, Dad stopped in front of a photograph I'd taken of him. "You photographed me?" he asked, surprised. The image showed him in his office, late afternoon light streaming through the window, surrounded by files and calculators, but looking thoughtful, almost wistful. I'd captured him during one of our conversations about his teaching dream, and something in his expression revealed the dreamer he'd buried beneath decades of practical decisions. "You were telling me about wanting to teach," I said, "about the scholarship program you're starting at the community college." I asked if I could capture that moment. He read the accompanying story I'd written about the accountant who'd built a successful practice but never lost his love of learning, who was now using his financial success to help other people pursue the dreams he'd deferred. "Harold Peterson," he read aloud, "spent 30 years building financial security for his family, but his greatest pride comes from the scholarship fund he established to help first-generation college students pursue careers in education. He believes it's never too late to serve the dreams you couldn't pursue yourself." Dad's eyes filled. "You see me as a teacher. I see you as someone who never stopped caring about other people's futures," I said. "That's what teach." We continued through the gallery, and I watched my parents' faces as they absorbed not just my work, but the reality of who I'd become. This wasn't the struggling son they'd worried about for years. This was a professional artist whose work was being celebrated in one of the country's most prestigious galleries. "Jake," Mom said as we paused in front of the Boston section, "I need to tell you something. After you left last year, after that awful Thanksgiving, I was angry at your father for weeks, but I was also angry at myself. Why? Because I realized I'd been enabling it. All those years of watching him criticize your choices, of making excuses for his behavior instead of standing up for you. I failed you as a mother. Mom, you didn't. I did. But watching you this past year, seeing how you've grown, how you've found your voice and your purpose, it's taught me something about courage, about standing up for what you believe in, even when it's difficult." Dad joined our conversation. "What your mother is trying to say is that you've changed all of it. Marcus bought that guitar and he's been taking lessons. Emma started a photography club at the hospital. I'm tutoring kids at the library twice a week. And your mother, I'm going back to school," Mum said proudly. "Interior design. I've always been good at decorating, at seeing how spaces could be transformed. I start classes in the fall." I stared at both of them, amazed. "You're all following your dreams. We're all following your example," Dad said quietly. "You showed us that it's never too late to become who you're meant to be." The opening was a tremendous success. By the end of the evening, red dots appeared next to nearly every photograph, sales that would allow me to continue the project for another year. More importantly, I'd had dozens of conversations with people who told me how the images had moved them, how they'd recognized their own stories in the faces on the wall. As the crowd began to thin, I found myself standing with my family near the center of the gallery, surrounded by the fruits of my journey from failure to fulfillment. "I have something to tell you all," I said. "The mayor's office wants to commission a New York version's project. But more than that, the National Endowment for the Arts is interested in funding a 5-year initiative to document American communities across the country." "5 years?" Emma asked. 50 cities, hundreds of portraits, thousands of stories. It would be the largest project of its kind ever undertaken. Dad stepped forward and put his hand on my shoulder. "Jake, that's extraordinary. But more than that, it's important. What you're doing, showing people that their lives matter, that their stories have value, that's not just art, that's healing." I felt the weight of his words, the significance of this moment. A year ago, this man had told me I was an embarrassment to the family. Tonight, he was telling me my work was healing. "There's one more thing," I said. If I take this project, I want to do it right. I want to work with local photographers in each city, mentor emerging artists, create a network of storytellers who can continue this work long after the initial project is finished. A legacy, Mum said softly. A movement, I corrected. A way of seeing and honoring ordinary people that doesn't end with me. As we left the gallery walking through the bright lights of Soho, I realized that success wasn't what I'd thought it was growing up. It wasn't about impressing other people or meeting their expectations or even making a lot of money. Success was about finding your purpose and having the courage to pursue it. It was about using your gifts to serve something larger than yourself. It was about creating work that mattered, that connected people, that made the world a little more understanding and compassionate. Jake, Dad said as we reached the street corner where we'd part ways, then back to their hotel, me to my temporary apartment in Brooklyn. I want to say something, and I want the whole family to hear it. We all stopped, forming a small circle on the busy New York sidewalk. A year ago, I thought I knew what success looked like. I thought it was about security, about following a predictable path, about avoiding risk at all costs. But tonight, looking at your work, seeing how people responded to, understanding the impact you're having on communities across the country, I realized I was completely wrong. He paused, looking each of us in the eye. Jay, you are the most successful person I know. Not because of the money or the recognition, but because you found your calling and you had the courage to follow it. Even when everyone around you told you it was impossible, you've built something beautiful and meaningful, and you've done it with integrity and compassion. He turned to Marcus and Emma. And you too, watching your brother's journey, learning from his example, finding your own courage to pursue your dreams. I'm proud of all of you, proud of the people you've become, proud of the risks you're taking, proud of the lives you're building. Finally, he looked at Mom and me. Linda, when you told me you wanted to go back to school, my first instinct was to worry about the practical implication, but then I remembered Jake's journey, and I realized that supporting the people you love means supporting their dreams, not their fears. Mum reached for his hand, tears streaming down her face. We're all going to be okay, Dad continued. Better than okay. We're going to be happy, fulfilled, purposeful, and we're going to be a family that supports each other's authentic selves instead of trying to force each other into boxes that don't fit. Marcus stepped forward and pulled me into a hug. I'm sorry it took so long for us to see you, he said. Really see you. I'm sorry I didn't believe in myself sooner, I replied. But maybe we all needed this journey to get to this place. Emma joined the hug, then Mom and Dad, and suddenly, we were a family embracing on a New York street corner, cars honking around us, strangers walking past, but none of that mattering because we had finally found our way back to each other. 3 months later, I was in my studio apartment in Brooklyn, preparing for the next phase of the American Portraits project, when my phone rang. It was Harold, calling from Portland. Jake, my boy, I saw the article in the newspaper about your New York exhibition. I'm so proud I could burst. Harold, it's good to hear your voice. How are the pigeons? Still coming by every morning, still expecting their breakfast. But Jake, I'm calling because I have news. The city is going to put a bench dedication plaque by our spot in honor of Harold and Margaret Peterson, whose love story inspired a nation through the lens of Jake Matthew. Can you believe that? I could barely speak. Harold, that's incredible. It's all because of you, son. Because you saw something worth photographing in an old man feeding birds. Because you understood that love doesn't end when someone dies. After we hung up, I sat looking out at the New York skyline, thinking about the chain of events that had brought me. A humiliating Thanksgiving dinner had led to a desperate cross-country move, which had led to meeting Harold, which had led to discovering my true calling, which had led to gallery exhibitions and national recognition, and a family that finally understood me. But more than any of that, it had led to the realization that everyone has a story worth telling, including my own. I picked up my camera and headed out into the city, ready to find the next story, the next face, the next reminder that in a world that often feels divided and disconnected, we are all more alike than different, all struggling and dreaming and loving and hoping in our own beautiful, ordinary way. My father had been right about one thing. Everyone at that Thanksgiving table had succeeded, but success wasn't what any of us thought it was. Marcus had succeeded in building a career, but his real success was learning to pursue his passion. Emma had succeeded in becoming a doctor, but her real success was learning to see her work as art. My parents had succeeded in providing for their family, but their real success was learning to their children's authentic self. And me. I had succeeded in becoming exactly who I was meant to be, someone who finds beauty in ordinary moments, who believes every person's story matters, who uses art to help people feel less alone in the world. As I walked through Brooklyn with my camera, I smiled, thinking about how far I'd come from that angry, hurt young man, packing his belongings while his family watched. I thought I was running away from my old life, but really, I'd been running toward my true life, and that, I realized, was the best kind of success of all.
Sometimes the people closest to us can't see our potential because they're too busy protecting us from their own fears. Jake's father wasn't really disappointed in his son's choices. He was terrified that Jake might fail the way he felt he had failed himself. But what he didn't understand was that the only real failure is never trying at all. Jake's journey reminds us that it's never too late to start over, to believe in yourself, to pursue what makes you come alive. Whether you're 28 or 68, whether you're struggling to find your path or wondering if you chose the wrong one years ago, remember this: your story isn't over. Your dreams don't have an expiration date. Every person Jake photographed had a story worth telling. Every face he captured had something beautiful to offer the world. And so do you. Maybe you've been told you're too old to change careers. Maybe your family doesn't understand your passions. Maybe you've convinced yourself it's too late to start something new. But Jake's story proves that sometimes the biggest disasters in our lives are actually doorways to our greatest discoveries. Have you ever felt like the family disappointment? Have you ever been told your dreams weren't practical enough, weren't safe enough, weren't good enough? Share your story in the comments below. Tell us about a time when you had to choose between pleasing others and being true to yourself. What did you choose? And how did it turn out? And if you're still searching for the courage to make that choice, if you're still waiting for permission to be yourself, let this be your sign. Let Jake's story remind you that the only approval you really need is your own. Your authentic self is not a consolation prize, it's the grand prize, and it's never too late to claim it. If this story touched your heart, if it reminded you of your own journey or gave you hope for the road ahead, please share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe to hear more stories about real people finding their way, choosing courage over comfort, and discovering that success isn't about fitting in. It's about standing out as exactly who you were meant to be. Because somewhere out there, someone needs to hear that their story matters too. Someone needs to know that it's possible to start over, to rebuild, to transform disappointment into purpose. Someone needs Jake's reminder that the most beautiful art comes from the courage to be authentically, unapologetically yourself. What's your story? We're listening.